بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آل محمد. In his name I begin with the best of blessings on the noblest of prophets and the Lord and beloved of our hearts, Prophet Muhammad and his holy progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Respected sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all. Parenting, especially in this world today, is not an easy matter. We are not born with the roadmap or the instructions, so to speak, on how to do it. We are born with parental instincts that help us and guide us. And alhamdulillah, we do have the actual guidelines from both the Islamic perspective of the Prophet's advice on how to raise children, as well as modern psychological theories of child development to know how it impacts mental health and the social issues we experience in our communities today. So let's compare and analyze some of these developments within the Islamic model in comparison to modern psychological theories of child development from the psychologist Dr. Erickson. He postulates 8 stages of development into adulthood and beyond, known as Erickson's stages of psychosocial development. In Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi's book, Islam, Faith, Practice, and History, he outlines that Islam has divided the upbringing of a child into 3 stages, from birth to age 21. The division is based on the following hadith of the Prophet ﷺ: the child is the master for 7 years, and a slave for 7 years, and a vizier for 7 years. So if he grows into a good character within 21 years, well and good. Otherwise, leave him alone because you have discharged your responsibility before Allah. The same hadith has been explained by Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, where he says, let your child play up to 7 years and keep him with you for education and training for another 7 years. Then if he succeeds, well and good. Otherwise, there is no good in him. In each of these 3 stages, we are told in detail what the physical, emotional, and spiritual developments are, and why it is important to teach certain behaviors to the child that involves the journey of acquiring knowledge. We know Islam's 3 stages are broken down in the following. The first stage from birth to age 7, the second, as we said, from 8 to 14, and the third is from 15 to 21. Erickson breaks down the stages as the following. Number 1, hope, basic trust versus basic mistrust, and this stage covers the period of infancy to 18 months. The second one is will autonomy versus shame, which covers early childhood around 1 to 3 years old. Then you have purpose initiative versus guilt, which is preschool and to 3 to 6 years old. Number 4, competence, which is in competence industry versus inferiority. So this is school age between 6 to 11 years old. And then number 5, fidelity, identity versus role confusion, which is the adolescent period from 12 to 18. Number 6, you have love intimacy versus isolation. This is the first stage of adult development. Number 7, care generativity versus stagnation, which is the second part of adulthood, which happens between 35 to 64. And finally, number 8, wisdom, ego, integrity versus despair. This stage affects the age group of 65 and above. So let's just focus on the first 5 that correlate to the Prophet and the Imam's hadith of the 3 stages. So the first stage is described as a carefree period, and the child is to be considered as master of the parents. It is the age of a child being a child and playing. He or she is not fully ready yet for education through formal instruction. So this doesn't mean that a child cannot grasp or understand anything. The child is constantly influenced by the atmosphere in which he or she lives in. And by observation, that's how they learn, and imitation, that's why we call them sponges. They just absorb everything. Therefore, it's really necessary for the parents to provide good examples by their own behavior as they are modeling that. Although the child is not ready yet for formal instructions, our imams have emphasized that religious issues, very basic and simple, should be introduced to them gradually. This graduality is the most important point to remember at this stage of life. The following hadith, narrated by Abu Abdullah ibn Fadl from Imam Sadiq, is very significant to understand what is meant by gradually. When the child reaches 3 years of age, teach him 7 times to recite La ilaha illallah. then leave him till at least he is 3 years, 7 months, and 20 days old. Then train him to say, Muhammadan Rasulullah. Then leave him till he completes 4 years. Then teach him 7 times to say, Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Then leave him at that till he reaches the age of 5. Then see if he can distinguish between the right and left hand. When he knows the difference, make him face the Qibla and tell him to do sajda. This is to continue till he is 6 years of age. Then he should be told to pray and taught the ruku' and the sajda. When he completes 7 years, then he should be asked to wash his face and hands and told to pray. This will continue till he reaches the age of 9, when he should be taught proper rituals of ablution for prayers and proper salah. When he learns the proper wudu and salah, Allah forgives the sins of his parents. A lot of psychomotor development skills, different brain functions, as well as spiritual development can be seen here. Erickson's first 3 stages also reflect similar dimensions. So the first one, hope, basic trust versus basic mistrust. This stage covers the period of infancy from 0 to 18 months, like we said, which is the most fundamental stage of life. Whether the baby develops basic trust or basic mistrust is not merely a matter of nurture. It is multifaceted and has strong social components. It depends on the quality of the maternal relationship and bonding. The mother carries out and reflects their inner perceptions of trustworthiness, a sense of personal meaning, and so on, onto the child. So if successful in this, the baby develops a sense of trust, which forms the basis in the child for a sense of identity. Failure to develop this trust will result in a feeling of fear and a sense that the world is inconsistent and unpredictable. Number 2, will autonomy versus shame. This covers early childhood, around 1 to 3 years old, we said, and this introduces the concept of autonomy versus shame and doubt. The child begins to discover the beginnings of his or her independence, and the parents must facilitate the child's sense of doing basic tasks all by themselves. So discouragement at this stage can lead the child to doubting his or her efficacy, and during this stage, the child is usually trying to master toilet training. Number 3, we have purpose, initiative versus guilt. So preschool, ages 3 to 6, and we look at questions such as, does the child have the ability to do things on their own, such as dress himself? If guilty about making his or her own choices, the child will not function well. Erickson has a positive outlook on this stage, saying that most guilt is quickly compensated by a sense of accomplishment. Again, we see from an Islamic perspective, there is much emphasis on the spiritual development through teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam's traditions at a young age to create routine and familiarity with duties that will become obligatory on each gender when they reach the respective age of around 9 for girls and around 13 for boys. And that depends on their maturity, of course. But for girls, it's pretty much set. So for the second Islamic stage, from 8 to 14, this is the age when the child's mind can grasp logical reasoning and is developed for formal education. So it's very important that the child not only be educated, but at the same time, he or she should be raised with proper Islamic ethics. By saying that the child is a slave from 8 to 14, the Prophet wants to emphasize that at this age, the parents should be strict in disciplining their children. A child is a slave in the sense that he has to follow the instructions of the parents and teachers and not to be a servant to their whims, which is misinterpreted widely by many families in our communities, and this results in maladaptive trust building and development between the parents and their children. So this can also be seen in the social familial issues we encounter with cross-generational and cultural conflicts from the parents and their kids, especially growing up in the society where the child is constantly bombarded with dual cultural exposure that can cause dual cultural identity conflicts or crisis, especially with the onslaught of social media and the pressures involved there. So it is interesting to see how in the sayings of the Prophet and the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, 3 things have been emphasized for the male children in the second stage of upbringing. The first one is literacy for secular knowledge. Number 2, religious knowledge. And 3rd, physical education and martial arts. For example, the Prophet said, "It is the right of the male child on his father to teach him the book of Allah and writing and swimming." Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam said, "It is the duty of the father to teach his son writing." We see here how religious education is very crucial at this age and stage so that the child's religious beliefs are based on sound reasoning and firm foundation. Literacy and seeking of secular and religious knowledge has been equally emphasized for the girls as well. However, instead of physical education, the hadith talk about those specific subjects which would help the girls in becoming good wives and educated mothers. The destiny of the future generations of the Ummah, after all, depends on the mothers who were learned, informed, and aware of their role in establishing a society which is conscious of Allah's presence. Now, this poses an interesting question when it comes to gender roles. Although hadiths outline different types of upbringing for each gender, let us not forget the social and time context of these hadith in a tribal and warrior type of climate, where the men were the dominant warrior provider type and the women were the caretaker type. So if we apply Imam Ali's famous quote of "do not raise your children the way your parents raised you, they were born in a different time," we can see how this also applies to modern gender roles between men and women and the challenges we have in the homes when raising children, but how also the demands of modern society challenge the traditional gender roles where women have also taken up more physical and other aspects of their roles. So Erickson outlines these stages with the following. Number 1, competence, industry, and inferiority in terms of the school age 6 to 11 years old, where the child is constantly comparing the self-worth to others, such as in the classroom environment. The child can recognize major disparities in personal abilities relative to other children, and Erickson places some emphasis on the teacher, who should ensure that the children do not feel inferior. Again, we see the emphasis on education here, but through the role of an education system where from an Islamic perspective, the role of education is heavily reliant on the parents. Hence, we see the importance of how both parents need to be educated, even if, let's say, the mothers will be home takers and child rearing. Finally, the 3rd stage of the Islamic development is from age 15 to 21. The Prophet describes the upbringing where the child is an advisor for the next 7 years. At the age of 14, 15 and up, a Muslim child is expected to have become a responsible teenager. Therefore, the Prophet says that the parents should now rather treat him more like a friend than a slave. At this stage, the parents should help guide and help their children make correct decisions for themselves. In mid and late teens, the child has to start the specific training or education for the career that he or she intends to pursue so that they may soon become more independent. It is also the time when the child is nearing the age of marriage. Now, we know that Islam has strongly emphasized that the parents should get their daughters and sons married at an early age when they have acquired mental maturity. Their higher education can continue even after marriage, but marriage should not be postponed for the sake of anything else. The condition of mental maturity cannot be measured by age or time. It is, of course, varies from person to person. Now, at the age of 21, the parents' responsibilities towards their children comes to an end. And it's fascinating to see when comparing culture and religion, we know that some of our parents do not stop at the responsibility at the age of 21 and continue on even after the child has a child of their own. Of course, this again depends on maturity. However, we see this in our community as a challenge of conflict between the parents and children that needs to be addressed and resolved in a very sensitive manner. A collaborative and loving upbringing will also create the mawadda and rahma, love for the child towards their parents in turn, and this may fulfill his obligation towards his parents. Now, Erickson's stages along the same line also explore these ideas. Number 1, in terms of fidelity, identity versus role confusion, which is the adolescent age of 12 to 18, this is the time of the questioning of the self. Who am I? How do I fit in? Where am I going in life? And Erickson believes that if the parents allow the child to explore, they will conclude in their own identity. However, the parents continuously push the children to conform to their views, then the teen will potentially face identity confusion. Finally, we see the stage of love, intimacy, and isolation. So this is the first stage of adult development. So this development usually happens during young adulthood, which is between the age of 18 to 15. So getting to know other people, dating, marriage, family, and friendships are important during the stage in life. By successfully forming loving relationships with other people, the individuals are able to experience love and intimacy. And those who fail to form lasting relationships, they may feel isolated or alone. So we explored the psychological emphasis of development, when we can see how it can impact a developing young mind's mental well-being, of their self, their identity, and where they stand in the world. By combining the wisdom of the Prophet and the Imams, which we have had for 1400 years, with modern psychological theories and research, we see the value in learning about child development and proper parenting. And we can see the product of such exemplary parenting that the Ahl al-Bayt instilled in their children, in which the outcome was exemplified in the role model of Ali Al Akbar, son of Al Hussain alayhi salam, and especially role model for our youth today. Ali Al Akbar, who was known to be the closest in appearance and personality of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, whose face glowed with the light of the Prophet, and was the first of the Hashemites to go into battle after the companions' martyrdoms, and whose light the enemy saw, yet still attacked. A light that was thirsting for water while battling, and him coming back to his father asking for water. And what could his father do but say, "I hope you soon meet your grandfather, and he will remove your thirst with a bowl of water so that you would never be thirsty again." With these words, Ali Al Akbar went back out into the battle, honoring his lineage until he cried out to his father, "O father, peace be upon you. This is my grandfather, the Prophet, who is now come and remove my thirst with an overflowing bowl of water." He says, "Rush to us." And with that, Ali Al Akbar breathed his last breath, martyred. And in honor of Ali Al Akbar, words of beautiful poetry by Nouri Sardar, "No son, no father." Hussain hears the strike of thunder. His son struck just like his father, Haidar. No son means no father. I saw Hussain by his tent almost collapse, choking from his tears, seeping through his tears' gaps, as if his heart exploded, or soul perhaps, hearing his son cry, "Farewell, oh my father." He cried, "Where are you, my son?" with his voice hoarse. Ali Akbar's blood flowed and blinded his horse. It ran to them, and their swords with no remorse broke apart the mirror of his great-grandfather. Hussain rode like a bird to its nest rescue. The angel of death towards its prey flew. Akbar sent no more. "O son, how I miss you." The eldest sat by Ali the elder, cleaning Ali's wounds. His tears rained a monsoon, a sight that turned to tears the harshest sand dune. I saw the sun cradling a shattered moon, the moon's soul left burnt by the sun's despair. Each tear that fell on Akbar's blood caused ripples. From grief, earth forgot that the sun it circles. And here a father with his own soul grapples, trying not to let it leave Karbala. No father can bear the loss of his own son. When your head was struck, I felt crippled, the sun. When your soul left my son, I felt mine had gone, and my lifeless body could move no further. Hussain takes him to his tent, his last abode. His mother sees him walk and taunts her the road. From wails and pupils in her eyes explode. What mother buries her son? What mother? Are you not Ali? Are you not Muhammad? I see a youth drowned in the blood that he's bled to the edge of death. Oh, my beloved, I'm led, because I'll see you again thereafter. Oh, first son, named after he, not fourth, but first. My tongue strangles my throat, knowing of your thirst. I wish the veins of my eyes from tears would burst, so that I could feed your dead tongue water. So that I could feed your dead tongue water. So I leave you with this now. Of how can you apply the role of parenting as taught by the prophetic and the Ahlul Bayt traditions, as seen through the product of such an upbringing of Ali Al Akbar, a role model for our youth today, into your daily life. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.